1,000 years ago, a handful of men stepped off a longship onto a frozen, unfamiliar coastline. This isn't legend. It actually happened. The Vikings reached America a full 5 centuries before Columbus. So, what happened next? They arrived, stayed a few years, and then vanished. What if they hadn't left? What if that small settlement had grown into a real colony, and eventually a kingdom? Would there be signs written in runic script in New York today? Would temples to Norse gods rise across the American continent? Let's take a closer look at this lost turn in history. By the end of the 10th century, Norwegian settlers had filled up Iceland and, led by Eric the Red, pushed on to Greenland. Around 1000 AD, Eric's son Leif Erikson sailed further west and reached what's believed to be the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. They called the region Vinland, meaning land of vines. The ruins found at Lonso Meadows confirm this wasn't just legend. They really lived there. But the colony didn't last. The reasons were simple: too few people, conflicts with local peoples, referred to in the sagas as the Skrellingar, and the fact that the home base in Greenland was already struggling to survive on its own. Within a few decades, the Vikings abandoned Vinland. But what if that retreat never happened? Suppose Leif Erikson's settlement was reinforced with more ships from Greenland. Maybe the climate cooperated a little longer this period. After all, coincided with what's known as the medieval warm period, when the North Atlantic was more habitable than usual. Maybe King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway, hearing news of these new lands, decided to send more settlers and ships. The church backed the expansion too, since new lands meant new souls to baptize. So instead of a few families, a genuine wave of migration reaches the shores of Vinland in the early 1000s. The first people to greet these bearded men in leather and chainmail, stepping off their longships, would likely be the Beothuk of what's now Newfoundland and Labrador, and further south, Algonquian-speaking peoples. The encounters described in the sagas were both curious and tense. The Vikings were open to trade, swapping red cloth, dairy products, and iron tools for furs, but disputes were inevitable too. The sagas describe a Viking camp being raided by native warriors, with casualties on both sides. For the vastly outnumbered Vikings, this was a serious disadvantage. If the colony had grown, this relationship would likely have evolved over time, either into lasting hostility, or, as the Vikings did with the Slavs in Russia and the Anglo-Saxons in England, into intermarriage and trade. A permanent Vinland would carry the classic hallmarks of Viking architecture: longhouses built of turf and timber, with a central hearth running down the middle. Small harbors would spring up along the coast, workshops for repairing ships, fishing, and processing hides. Over time, these camps would grow into villages, and villages into towns. True to Norse tradition, settlers would hold their own thing, assemblies, resolving disputes by unanimous vote or by duel. Perhaps North America's first parliament would be a gathering of free farmers in the square of a Viking village. Unlike Rome, the Vikings had no ambition to build a centralized empire. They were more a patchwork of independent clans, driven by trade and farming, so their relationship with native peoples would likely have played out on a smaller scale. Village-by-village alliances, village-by-village conflicts. Some native communities might have seen the advantage of iron tools and new farming techniques and drawn closer to the Vikings. But the greatest danger would have been invisible: disease. Native peoples had no immunity to the smallpox, measles, and other pathogens Europeans carried. This would mean the catastrophe that historically struck in the 1500s could instead unfold 5 centuries earlier on a smaller scale, but just as devastating. Vinland would become a vital resource for Greenland and Iceland: timber. Greenland had almost no trees, while Vinland was covered in forest. Ships could finally be built without hauling lumber all the way from Europe. Beaver and otter pelts, cod, and perhaps silver and copper deposits discovered over time, all of it would flow through Greenland to Norway. and from there, across northern Europe, crops like maize and beans would enter Scandinavian tables long before Columbus. Perhaps what we call the Columbian Exchange would instead go down in history as the Viking Exchange. The runic alphabet, upon contact with native languages, could have taken an interesting turn. Maybe some native words worked their way into Old Norse, or the reverse happened. Craftsmanship might have blended as well. Viking ship carving motifs merging with native totem art, or Viking jewelry decorated with native beadwork. The sagas, the Vikings' oral, and later written epics, would grow richer with new stories. No longer just about Greenland and Iceland, but about generations raised in Vinland. Maybe there'd even be a literary genre today called the Vinland saga. If Vinland had truly taken hold, it would have meant a foothold across the Atlantic for the Kingdom of Norway, and later the United Kingdom of Denmark, Norway. And that would change something else entirely. When Columbus set sail in 1492, he wouldn't have found an undiscovered continent, but a Vinland already settled, Christianized, and paying tribute to Scandinavian kings. Spanish and Portuguese conquests in South and Central America might have still played out much the same way, but the picture in the north would look completely different. English and French colonization wouldn't be arriving to empty land, but to a Norse native hybrid society that had already existed for centuries. By the 1300s, there might be a fortified Norse town along the Newfoundland coast, known as Vinborg or something like it, but history offers us a warning. Even the Norse colony in Greenland vanished entirely by the mid-1400s, undone by a cooling climate and severed ties with Europe. So Vinland's survival was never guaranteed. Even as a larger colony, it might still have succumbed to the harshness of the Little Ice Age. Still, had it succeeded, we'd be looking at a North America today shaped by both indigenous and Scandinavian roots, a completely different map of language, religion, and culture. So, what do you think? If the Vikings had stayed in America for good, would we be reading runic inscriptions in Newfoundland today? Would there be an Old Norse dialect spoken there, blended with native languages? Or would this colony have collapsed too, just as it did in reality, worn down by the cruelty of time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because sometimes, all it takes to change the course of history is one long ship from the north, and a handful of stubborn settlers who refuse to leave.